And action. Hey everyone, it's DrRic. So Jules had a question, in addition to a couple other people, about eating like you're having an orgasm. So what does one have to do with the other? I'll explain in a second. This all came about because of a post I put on Facebook, and if you're not on Facebook, look me up, DrRic Saguil. That's DrRic Saguil, and friend me, and I'll show you my pictures. I post how I live to empower patients to be healthier. I try to live my best life at 56, and I'm not perfect, but I'm always striving and trying to dial it in. And then, wouldn't you know it, once you get used to dialing in your 50s, your 60s comes along, you have to change everything up again. But if this is the first time you're finding me on YouTube, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below and the alert button to find out when I put out new videos. So, orgasmic eating. First, let's talk about an orgasm. An orgasm is a result of sexual stimulation. And if done right, the orgasm will be the best feeling a human being can have. And why is that? Well, it's built into our DNA because we're supposed to be able to try to achieve that because it's a result of sex. And with sex, you have reproduction. We have reproduction, you have the longevity of the species. If you didn't have a reward of some sort built into the DNA, then nobody would want to have intercourse, and the species would die off or dwindle off. So there's always something happening there. So that is a reward, and the reward is the physical reward. It's also the emotional reward, and it's also the hormonal reward. So what usually happens in an orgasm is it can last a fraction of a second to a few seconds, and some people who are really lucky, a minute or two. What culminates is intercourse that leads to that. But what the important thing is here is what happens afterward. Usually you'll be on cloud nine. You'll be elated. You'll be in ecstasy for a couple hours. This can also be likened to what happens after you eat a really good meal. Not to the point of over-distension, but just tasting a great meal. Several course meal. The great surroundings of a restaurant per se, or somebody cooking from home who put the love and time into the cooking, and you just indulge in the meal. That might not be tangible to you, so let me explain it in a different way. If you've ever been on vacation, now I'm dressed like this because it's now November, the first snowfall of Chicago, 2018, and I'm shoveling. And I'm pretty sure for the next 3 to 4 to 5 months, it's going to be just as cold, just as dark, just as windy, and just as wet. And that's not fun when you constantly have to get exposed to that day in, day out for several months. So what do we do in Chicago? We go on vacation. And, well, I meditate and I eat properly and I exercise, but we go on vacation. And when we go on vacation, and you probably know it, even if you don't live in Chicago, when you go on vacation, you just feel great. Obviously in Chicago, we go usually to the south, to a beach, or outside the U.S. We go somewhere where it's different, where it's warm, because we miss that. And when you come back from vacation, even as you step off the plane back into coldness, even with your first day back at work on Monday, even if you have to shovel again several days after your vacation, you're still pretty bulletproof and happy and showing everybody your pictures, and everybody's getting annoyed because you're just so happy and showing pictures and everybody else is kind of depressed. That's because you have an overabundance of serotonin and oxytocin. Those two hormones are the same hormones that are secreted when you have an orgasm. They're also the same hormones that are secreted when you meditate, thus the reason why I always say you should meditate twice a day, 5 to 30 minutes of some mindful practice. But unfortunately, when I bring that up, most people are like, "What's mindfulness?" Or, "Nah, I can't sit straight. I can't sit for that. I'm too antsy. I can't do it." Or, I don't go to church." You know, that's the usual. It's very hard to pass that on to patients because the majority of patients, at least the majority of Americans I see, aren't really into it or haven't been informed about what mindfulness is. But anyway, so you can have it in mindfulness practice. And that's why when you meet a yoga practitioner or a meditator, they will not stop that practice because of what they experienced. Imagine having the same sensation as how you feel after an orgasm for like twice a day. If you meditate twice a day, like I said, you can be carried with that same great high feeling for a couple hours. And again, you'll be bulletproof to stress. You'll be bulletproof to taking on or being tempted to take on a stress response when you're being challenged, when you're being tailgated, when a problem is asking you to solve it. Usually when all those stressors occur, the stress response comes on, adrenaline, norepinephrine comes on, the adrenals get turned on, cortisol gets turned on, and serotonin and oxytocin go down. You can't be in stress response and parasympathetic or love response at the same time. It's one or the other. The two don't really coexist. When you eat right, when you meditate twice a day, when you come back from vacation, when you get a hug, when you hug or hang out with a pet, when you're holding hands with a loved one, when you have sex, you'll have a high amount of oxytocin and serotonin. Now, some of you might remember serotonin as being that hormone that is secreted when you take Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, sometimes Lexapro and Cymbalta. They all add more, they make more be present in your bloodstream and your brain. And that's kind of like a false serotonin high. It's not, it's like serotonin all the time. It's a little different than having you feel happy from eating properly. But so why am I saying this? Because this is the way we're supposed to eat. There are techniques that our grandmas, old school restaurant owners, that's where, again, this is where it all started. I was eating at an Italian restaurant in Bloomingdale, where you had Italians that owned the restaurant. Actually, it was a Sardinian a person who owned it, but he had Italian chefs. The sous chef, the pizza chef were Italian, and the Sardinia technically is about the same, but they had a little bit of flair, but the food was great. And I'm at this point in time vegan. I was a vegetarian, a pescatarian, but I'm vegan, and I was able to get a vegan dish, and it was fantastic. And my brain was really flowing, and that's why I posted, and I came up with a couple of ideas, and I just thought I'd talk about it. But that's why it's so important to eat properly. When you have something like fast food is not rewarding. It might feel and taste good because the sensation is overwhelming or the crunch is so good, but it will usually bite you in the ass and not serve you later on. That's the problem with fast food. It's dangerous in the long run because of the quality of the components and macronutrients in the food. But in the short run, the very short run, you'll get a very big reward from the combination of fat, salt, and sugar that is mixed in by the companies. If you ever come to my office, my clinic, you'll see that in the entry area, I have an old steak, egg, and cheese bagel that I used to eat in my when I used to work for a Central DuPage hospital in the 90s. I used to eat those things all the time, and they're very rewarding. Nice crunch, good texture, straight out of the drive-through window. And I would eat standing up. Right before I'd run into a patient's room, I'd have my large McDonald's coffee with 10 packs of sugar. But I would crash later on. And I did develop atrial fibrillation at that point in time. So I've beat it since then. I do not eat McDonald's. I have McDonald's owners as my patients, but I will not do that. So just because it will hurt me later on. And the tiny bit of excitement and satisfaction you get doesn't give you that serotonin rush. It probably gives you a placebo rush, if anything, but later on it'll give you a nocebo rush and hurt you. So good cooking is important. Old school cooking from a grandma is important. That's why I'll tell my teen to 20-year-olds, please learn from your grandmas if they're still around. I should have taken advantage of my mom. She was a great cook. She learned on her own. Don't have her around anymore, but I am learning on my own. And anytime I have an older patient come in, I'll always pick their brain. So what are these old school rules? Well, not eating with your mouth full. When you're eating with your mouth full, or when you're talking with your mouth full, excuse me, the theory is when you talk, you might, number one, spit on your food and the other person's food, but you're also engaging conversation when you should be enjoying your food. One of the best times I've had Indian food was at the Chopra Center when we were supposed to eat in silence, where we were in a huge hall and the tables were 10-seaters and everybody was supposed to sit down and not speak. And it was very uncomfortable at first, but after we all kind of shook it off, I was with a bunch of docs at my table. After we all shook it off, it was actually one of the best meals I've ever had. And I don't know if it was placebo or not, or if it was really a good chef, but when you eat in silence and when you eat and take your time and you don't engage with too much conversation and you pay attention to what you're eating, you'll enjoy your food more. When you enjoy your food more, again, serotonin jacks up. If the food is prepared properly, serotonin jacks up and you don't have the inflammatory markers later on. But that also goes a little bit against the tradition of the camaraderie. Now, I just mentioned not eating, eating but not talking too much. The Italian get-together is a phenomenon we don't experience here. I experienced it when I went to Italy. And I sat down with my family, but I noticed a lot of people are just eating and talking after the meal, having an espresso, then having another course, and then eating more, and then taking a break. They would talk usually between the servings or between the courses of the meals, and then they go out and smoke and then come back in. You know, I didn't see as many obese people in Italy when I was walking around in Rome and in Florence. And I talked to a cardiologist, Italian cardiologist, and he did say that the heart disease problem is not from the food. There is a smoking problem and COPD, but they don't have as much heart disease as we have in the United States, and they're thinner than compared to the average American. So they must be doing something properly because they eat a lot and they eat long. But I think they take their time and they have fun. Versus, and I've been guilty of this, standing and eating real fast or eating in the car because you don't have any time. I think the American dream is really the American nightmare if you think about it. But so, not talking while you're eating, eating with a nice group in peace. Sometimes if you take a couple seconds and pause before you eat, especially if you're famished. I leave the office here late at night and I make it a point to eat before I go, because if I go into my house very, very hungry, sometimes it'll trigger on the way home a hunting reflex. And when you trigger that hunting reflex, your body is going to be difficult to stop eating once you have your satiating plate, your usual plate, because the brain is triggered to say, hey, I don't like what we just went through. We just went through famine, so start to engorge. Kind of like a bear coming out of hibernation. So when you get home, you eat a plate, and then you usually are fine after that, but because the brain experienced famine, it says eat another plate, eat some more snacks, have a drink. So I try to have a little bit of a highly satiated macronutrient before I go home. And it's usually a protein of some sort. Or I'll indulge in a salad or something. Sometimes I'll do a fat bomb. The keto people know about fat bombs. But something so I can just go in and relax instead of eat as soon as I get through the door. So, and I do have a video from before, the hunger hormone cascade that I've done, and it tells you, I'll put a link down below, but it tells you about if you're hungry, that's fine. And like Mom said, don't eat before dinner because you don't want to spoil your appetite. Well, I try not to eat before dinner, but if it's been a long time or I've been fasting, I also don't want to trigger the hunting reflex too. So there's a fine line between the two. I also think that you should finish your food. Your moms will always tell you, finish your food. Because the plate is, especially if it's prepared by old school, the combination and the portions on the plate are balanced perfectly. So there's fiber, there's greens, there's lentils, there's beans, there's a little meat, there's fat. And the combination of everything is the way we do it. I remember when I was younger and my daughter was just a toddler, or I forget how old she was, but yes, I used to stop by McDonald's for the toy, and what would she do? She'd eat the fries before eating the burger or the chicken nuggets or whatever we got back then. Luckily, she turned out okay, and she doesn't have that many health problems. So, but I think if you just eat the fries, you just hit yourself with carbohydrate, if you can call fries from McDonald's carbohydrate, instead of eating the protein. If you can call hamburger and chicken McNuggets a protein, which I don't call protein. But again, nothing against McDonald's. It's a fast reward, but I think we pay for that in the end. With the education I have now, I would never do that to my kids. So when you have a plate that's prepared by grandma, usually it's balanced. And if you eat it properly, you eat the course meals like in Italy, you eat the meals as they come out properly and slowly, and maybe have the vino, the wine, fine. But if you do everything, then the balance is there. Then instead of just picking at one portion, so finishing your plate is important. Now, that doesn't mean you can overindulge with a huge plate. You should be mindful about how many times you eat, the speed at which you eat, what's on your plate. I always say for my guys that have cholesterol problems, half of the plate or the box should be fiber or something of a plant. And then the other half you can work on, especially my guys that are just beginning this thing. So it is important to balance out versus having the whole thing like a big steak and that's all, and then a little bit of mashed potatoes. So try to balance it out, please. You don't have to be vegan. I'm just it to help my friend Bob, but and also to empower myself. I wanted to give this a try and see if I can still keep my exercise routine up and my waistline and my strength up. And it's working. And it's now the 8th week. So I am enjoying what I do. I want my patients to enjoy what they do. I want them to use science of modern technology and to figure out how to best serve them, but I also want them to embrace the old school rules of eating. There's also after eating. Now, I said to pause before you eat, so you can take a second, whether you pray, take a couple breaths, just smile, have a decent conversation, and then eat. I think it's important because if you just dive into it, sometimes again the hunger hormone takes over. So if you just take your time, you can go into it. And that's a lot of times when you have a really high surge of hormone, it'll calm down so that you can enjoy your food without diving in and taking big bites and not knowing that you just tasted food. When you swallow food real fast, your taste buds and the texture and the tactile responsiveness in the mouth, that's very important to give feedback to the brain. If you just inhale that, the brain says, I didn't eat. I drank something, I didn't eat. And that's the argument, not to sidetrack, but that's the argument about blending up your food. Sometimes your food, when you drink it, your meal when you drink it, your brain just said, what, I just drank something, that wasn't a meal. When your stomach can feel it, but anyway. So that's why it's always important to have not just the powdered supplements, but also a real whole food, mostly plant-based diet. So those of you who do meal substitutes. So the other thing is at the tail end, that's the beginning, pause. At the tail end of your meal, sometimes if you do the Okinawan technique of hara hachibu, where you just wait until when you feel your stomach is 7/10 full, you pause. You push away from the table before you get to 10/10 full. 10/10 full is distended and bloated. And wherever you're distended, that long tube of the digestive tract, that food of distension is going to move down into your small intestine, and that'll be bloated too. So you'll have this big bloat. Just you'll carry that for that food baby for a couple of hours to half a day to maybe a day if you don't move your bowels on a regular basis. And I do think you should move your bowels at least once a day. I don't think constipation is human. It's not normal. There's probably a thyroid problem or magnesium problem or not enough fiber, or too much stress. Anyway, again, not to go off track, but I think that hara hachibu technique of pushing back from the table when you're 7/10 full is a good idea. Now that kind of goes away from the Italian thing where you're supposed to eat the whole plate and not upset grandma or your host, but I think that if you just wait, you might be able to go back to digesting, or you might be able to say, I'm happy, I'm satiated, I get it. Because again, if the hunger hormone takes over and you're already 7/10 full as far as the distension and the feel in the gut, and the hormone is saying eat more, you can wait a little bit, and then that urge to eat more will pass. Usually I think it takes about 10 to 20 minutes, so you just have to wait, don't eat too fast. So there are more things, like walking after you eat. In Italy, there's passeggiata, I think I pronounced it properly, where you get out and walk and you see your neighbors and you converse. You don't have to run, and it's not like a hiking thing, but just walk after you eat. And it helps you, number one, to get the food to digest properly and head downward with gravity. Number two, it also balances out the hormones, so you're just not flopping on the couch. There's nothing like eating a good meal and then lying down. It's so unhealthy. Lying down, number one, physically lying down will make you, if you're standing up and your stomach's here and your esophagus is here, lying down means the stomach and the esophagus are at the same level. You're going to bring up the food and cause reflux. If you walk around a little bit, food stays down, esophagus stays tight, you won't have reflux. So it's important to do those old school techniques. And all those things, if done properly, will give you a kind of orgasm, or at least an orgasm feeling. And is there anything wrong with orgasm feeling? No. I mean, if you do it on a regular basis, whether it's truly sex or eating, then great. If you just meditate, great. But the idea is we are really over-challenged with stress, adrenaline, norepinephrine hormones, epinephrine hormones, cortisol, and we need to balance that out. It's supposed to be a 3-time-a-year kind of thing, but we have that like 8 hours a day, which is not good. And most of us don't practice, most of us don't have sex twice a day. Most of us don't practice meditation. So it is important to balance the stress response with the love response. So, good question, Jules. For the rest of you, if you have any other comments, put them down below. Otherwise, I really appreciate you guys watching and subscribing, and I'll see you in the next clinic.